Welcome and welcome back. Last episode we talked about adaptations and transmedia convergence, discussing the role comics play as a singular medium within a larger landscape of media storytelling. More than ever, we live in a world where stories are constantly transformed and reimagined in different forms and with different influences. But this episode, let's take a step back from how the comic industry interacts with other media industries, and instead focus on one of the greatest shifts in the comic industry, the rise of webcomics. The first known webcomic was Witches and Stitches, which was written in 1985 by Eric Milliken and was published on CompuServe, the first commercial online service and one that predated the World Wide Web. With the web invented, cartoonists began to populate the space with panels and strips, experimenting with the form and reaching audiences across the world. And then Scott McCloud released Reinventing Comics in 2000, which espoused the potential of digital production, digital delivery, and of course, digital comics, inspiring the industry and birthing a new perspective on the future of comics. We briefly touched on the rise of webcomics when we were discussing the current state of the industry, as comic publishers have been forced to pay attention to changing habits of consumers. But now the simple fact is that just about anyone can make a webcomic. Between the widespread distribution capabilities of the internet, the convenience of social media platforms, and increased access to advanced and often professional-level drawing software, it's easier than ever to bring your comic to life on the web. Which means webcomics have become a driving industry force all their own, evolving new publishers, formats, and structures. In this episode, we're going to examine these innovations and opportunities that have evolved as webcomics have grown into a veritable industry of their own. Part of the struggle that has arisen with the popularity of webcomics has been the question of how to efficiently monetize digital content. It's a question that's plagued industries practically since the internet began. From journalism to music to film, any industry that wants their content to be consumable online has to eventually ask, how can we make money on this? So far, the answers to that question have resulted in subscription and membership services, ad revenue structures, sponsored content, and donation requests. For larger comic publishers, monetizing digital comics is typically similar to the shift towards ebooks. Digital comics are usually just digital e-editions of the comics normally available in print format, providing a sometimes cheaper, more easily available option for consumers, all while still preserving the value of the print edition. Unlike larger publishers, independent webcomic creators don't typically sell their works in comparable digital storefronts. Webcomics are almost universally available online for free for any reader, so many independent creators must rely on advertisements and donation structures to support their comic, at least until they gain enough popularity to maybe sell print copies and merchandise for their work. Kickstarter remains a remarkably popular option for webcomic creators who are interested in transforming their digital story into print form, kickstarting their independent publication with support from their readers. In 2018, 1,457 comic book projects, varying from graphic novels to webcomics, were funded, raising $16 million in pledges. What's even more impressive is that 70% of the comic book projects on Kickstarter that year reached their funding goals, a remarkably high percentage of success for independent creators. Patreon and Ko-fi are similar platforms made to financially support creators, but with a very different payment model than Kickstarter. With Kickstarter, backers fund a specific project and expect certain rewards related to that project. Patreon and Ko-fi are more targeted towards long-term, consistent support for creators, whether they're working on one continuous project, like a webcomic, or producing a wide range of content, like maybe an illustrator. Donors subscribe to give money on a monthly or incremental basis, creating a stable revenue source for those creators. On Ko-fi, donors also have the option for one-time donations if a monthly payment isn't practical for them. In return for their money, supporters are usually given sneak peeks, behind-the-scenes material, or other exclusive bonuses. Ko-fi currently boasts over 400,000 creators, while Patreon hosts over 100,000 active creators, earning a projected $300 million in 2018. However, these platforms require some extent of a fan base before they can become lucrative, and hosting your own website can be potentially costly. Many webcomic creators find it more practical to work with an established webcomic publisher. These publishers, such as Hiveworks and SmackJeeves, offer a platform for webcomic creators to publish their comics. Publishers provide support with website creation and publicity, and Hiveworks is particularly renowned for cross-promoting their comics. Creators profit from ad revenue and are free to use supporting services like Patreon to fund their work. Hiveworks also hosts a store where creators can profit off of merchandise sales and offers page rate payment for comics they directly produce. Webcomic creators can also publish their work on Webtoon, a Korean website that is now one of the biggest global providers of digital comics, with 17 million monthly users. Or they can publish through Comixology Submit, the branch of Comixology dedicated to independent self-published works. Both Webtoon and Comixology Submit are free platforms, allowing any webcomic creator to publish their work, assuming their submission is approved. But the catch is that there's no guarantee of profits. Comixology gives creators 50% of the net sales of their title, while on Webtoon, if your comic is successful and becomes featured, then you receive monthly payments, with extra bonuses for certain levels of popularity. As of August 2018, though, Webtoon has also launched a beta for an ad revenue sharing program, moving towards greater monetization opportunities for creators. Having said all that, it's important to note that webcomics are still often works of passion. Unless a webcomic has gained attention and financial support, creators typically cannot dedicate their full attention to making comics, and even then, it's not a particularly lucrative venture. But now, at least, the birth of monetization structures in webcomic publishers have given independent creators a chance to profit, to get their foot in the door and earn enough money to support their art and their stories. Which is great news for innovation, because the rise of webcomics and independent creators has led to some truly revolutionary works that have begun to evolve and change the traditional comic medium. We discussed earlier on in this series about the significance of visual literacy and how we've learned to read images, and especially comics, in a specific way. But those building blocks of structure and iconography are certainly still used. But the flexibility of the web platform is sparking innovation, allowing creators to go beyond what we think comics should look like. As noted earlier, digital editions of published comics and graphic novels are typically just that, digital copies of what you'd see on the physical printed page. It's the same concept as most ebooks, which simply provide the book content on a screen instead of paper, a different platform to consume the same content. But webcomics live on the internet, and while they may one day find their way to a print edition, their original form means that webcomics are not constrained by the page. For one, webcomics can utilize the entire web page as a canvas, breaking outside the boundaries of the standard page dimensions. This naturally provides more room for comic creators to work with, but by expanding beyond the page, webcomics are able to utilize the web medium to build tension, to change tone, and ultimately impact the reader's experience. One of my favorite examples of this is the webcomic Unsounded. As the plot climaxes and the action rises, the author, Ashley Cope, lets her art flow off the traditional page. The otherworldly bursts out of the panels, into the margins, and eventually contaminates the entire internet window. And it works so well because it shocks readers. The boundaries of the page are supposed to be safe and predictable. They keep us distant from what's going on in the story, as untouched bystanders watching it all unfold. But once the art and the story breaks that fourth wall, it reaches out towards the readers, encroaching on our space. And in that moment, it becomes real to us. Similar to formalist styles of film editing, like Eisenstein's montage editing, webcomics like Unsounded draw the reader's attention to its techniques, which ultimately forces readers to engage emotionally and intellectually with the work. However, each web page is still a constraint in itself. It may be a larger, more flexible canvas, but readers still need to click forward to go to the next page. But one form of webcomic innovation that breaks from that page structure is the infinite scroll. You've seen it on social media and those news websites that won't let you ever reach the bottom of the page. Infinite scroll automatically loads the next page's content, eliminating the need for pagination. For comics, this conceivably allows readers to scroll through the entirety of the work as one complete experience, rather than clicking forward through pages. Webtoon is well known for hosting comics intended to be scrolled vertically through, and independent webcomic sites often explore the adaptability of scrolling platforms. The infinite scroll is executed rather neatly in the webcomic These Memories Won't Last by Stuart Campbell, a biographical comic about Campbell's grandfather and his dementia. As the reader scrolls, the words scroll upwards, while the art and panels scroll downwards, meeting in the middle. This simultaneous scroll visually represents the narrative marriage between the images and the text, all while playing with the idea of the passage of time. The narrator's thread moves upwards, forward, based on the scroll direction, while the images, which represent his grandfather's memory, slip downward, falling off the page. And if the reader pauses the scroll for too long, the words and the images fade, lost to the fog, just like his grandfather's memories. As a work, These Memories Won't Last is a powerful example of how you can use a medium to reinforce and amplify the impact of your story. Campbell describes his grandfather's memory deterioration, and we can feel a similar fear as the story slips through our grasp too. Other works find increasingly creative ways to utilize the scroll feature. One short Korean webcomic available on Webtoon utilizes this technique with particular efficacy. Bongseon-dong Ghost by Horeng is a short horror webcomic on an infinite scroll platform. The story tells a fairly typical scary story of a ghostly figure walking around at night, progressing as you scroll down the page. But once you hit the jump scare, the comic rapidly auto-scrolls through the panels, both creating the illusion of movement and wresting control from the reader. By suddenly losing control of the scroll, readers are appropriately startled, creating an effective jump scare in a static medium. But even more than that, the loss of control makes readers helpless, vulnerable, and intimately fearful. A typical comic page promises that safety, and there's comfort in that predictability. Just like with Unsounded, when a comic creator subverts that expectation, breaching the distance between the reader and the story, they create a very real tension and sense of danger. Other works, like the webcomic To Be Continued by Lorenzo Getty, still divide updates into episodes, keeping some degree of the pagination. But each episode uses the web canvas to its full capacity, moving through the landscape horizontally, vertically, and diagonally, almost tracking the motion of the comic like a camera in a movie. The scrolling allows readers to control their pace, but flows with smoother consistency as we watch the story unfold. Now, to be fair, many webcomics maintain the same page format, even if they play with the industry standards page sizes. Webcomic pages are still typically read in the same direction as their native language, jump sequentially from panel to panel, utilize gutter space, occasionally use double spreads for larger images, and ultimately ask you to move forward by clicking next, turning that digital page. These print styles and techniques have also become the webcomic standard for many reasons, partially because it's the established visual language we've learned to read, partially because some platforms require certain page sizes for publication. For many readers, it's also just a format that makes sense for the story they want to tell. Not all stories are improved by techniques like the infinite scroll, which keeps you going and going ad nauseum. The literal turning of the page allows readers to take the story at their own pace, while also involving the reader, making us complicit in the story's progression. And many webcomic creators post in installments, releasing the next page or set of pages according to an update schedule. Infinite scroll comics work well when the entire comic is released in one installment. It's less convenient for updated comics, which either forces returning readers to scroll through the entire comic every update, or new readers to begin at the end and scroll down to the beginning. Which is all to say that no matter their form and innovations, webcomics provide the freedom for independent creators to tell stories in the manner that best suits their content. At its heart, that's what's exciting about the webcomic boom. More than ever, independent creators are able to make their works, support their art, and find an audience, providing a platform for more voices and more stories that we may not have otherwise been able to hear. Separate from publisher restrictions and gatekeeping, webcomics have become a home for diverse voices, giving creators the freedom to tell their stories in their own way. In the next episode, we'll look at how a few particularly innovative webcomics even take these freedoms to an entirely different degree. Beyond the typical comic page, these innovative works include audio, video, and interactive components, creating a new hybrid medium called multimedia webcomics. Earlier, we talked about These Memories Won't Last, which actually is a multimedia webcomic. In addition to its scrolling method, Campbell includes animations and uses music to characterize the shifting tones of the piece, going well beyond the traditional comic medium in more than just format. Stay tuned, and we'll take a closer look at what it means to be a multimedia webcomic in the current media landscape, diving into one of the most revolutionary examples, Homestuck.